Howard was kind of like a father to me. He was like a dad. Working with Howard helped me to understand better how to be a Black man and to bear up and overcome and triumph, and how to speak, and the advantages of oratory, the advantages of rhetoric, and always being able to represent. You know, and so whatever I have learned, to a large extent, it comes from him. I always knew he could write. I always had known that. But that first paragraph, oh golly, I read it and I said, oh my golly, he's giving us a version of Genesis. This is amazing. And there are parts of it that were funny, parts of it that are funny, parts of it that are poignant, parts of it that are upsetting in terms of some of the personal mishaps that he experienced. Howard Douglas McCurdy, born December 10, 1932, came of age in the 1940s as a teenager and into the 50s, of course, as someone who was very unusual for a young Black Canadian of that era, because he was a bit of a loner. He had friends as a boy, and used to have a lot of fun with them. But sooner or later, even as a child, as a boy, he gravitated towards the library, the Amherstburg Public Library. And often he was the only person in the library, or at least the only kid in the library. And he found himself reading the stories of the Greek and Roman myths, and of course books about nature, and that brought him to start reading about biology and about astronomy and geography and geology and works about the sciences or on the sciences in general. And he was often there basically shutting the place down. He was someone who was always questioning, always wondering about his environment, about others. He was argumentative, not in the sense, not because he wanted to have a dispute or cause debates, but because he was really trying to find out why other people held the beliefs that they held. Once he entered college, he got into debates with all of the professors that he had. And this is at what was then Assumption College, which later became the University of Windsor, back in the mid-1950s when he was a student there. And he loved to cause the priest professors lots of conniptions because he was constantly challenging their belief in God. But he had lost that belief when he was a boy, so he really had a tough time accepting that anybody could actually believe in God. Like, this is ridiculous from a scientific perspective. A lot of us may not know, and a lot of younger people will not know, that there was segregation in Canada. It was more polite, which doesn't make it any less harmful or any less awful. When you are victimized by this notion that you are inferior, or you're not good enough to sit at a restaurant table with someone else, or you can't go on a beach, or you can't go on a golf course. And Howard suffered from those experiences of segregation in southwestern Ontario, in Essex County, in Windsor, in Chatham, in Amherstburg, in London, and so on. And so as a young man, becoming a scientist en route to becoming a professor of microbiology, he also takes the time to organize Black people, white allies as well. And eventually, Howard's activism, along with the Guardian Club in general, in the early 1960s, helped to bring about the creation of the Ontario Human Rights Commission. It also he also ended up catalyzing in 1968, along with Rocky Jones, establishment of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, the anti-racism activities of the 1950s and 1960s, once these were also buttressed by the flowering of the Black Power and Black Arts movement movements in the 1960s in the United States ended up motivating Howard to construct what became the National Black Coalition of Canada, founded in 1969, which he was the organizing principal for that organization, the first truly national Black organization in Canadian history. And as I talk about that, you need to keep reminding us, the man was also a microbiologist of no mean repute. I talk a lot in my foreword about the fact that he was always someone who was going between the microphone and the microscope. It's no wonder then that he ends up becoming the very first tenured Black Canadian professor. When he was elected as a member of Parliament in 1984, he very quickly came to realize that he was the member who held the greatest number of degrees. And so not only was he the best dressed MP, he was also the best educated MP as far as he was concerned, and was very willing to debate with anybody about anything because he felt that he really did know more than they did. And he was also very willing to do the research necessary to sustain whatever point it was he might want to make during question period or in committee or in any other kind of debate he might have with his political rivals and so on, while still appreciating them very, very much so.
On the one hand, we heard this ecstatic appraisal of market forces by the earlier spokesman on the government side, as if there existed free enterprise in a vacuum. Now,
he was an iconoclast in some ways, while at the same time, this is a strange thing. You know, it's a strange thing. I'm going to put these two words together. He was an iconoclast in terms of fighting against the restrictions on people due to sex, due to race, due to gender, due to sexual orientation, religious beliefs, and so on. And at the same time, he was a role model. He was also someone who never hesitated to represent the Black community. He never saw himself as being a member of Parliament for Black Canadians. He never did see himself as occupying that kind of role. Absolutely not. He was the member of Parliament for Windsor-Walkerville and then later Windsor-Lake St. Clair. And that was his first priority, represent his constituents. At the same time, he was the only Black member of Parliament for 9 years. He was the second Black member of Parliament after Lincoln Alexander, but he was the only Black member of Parliament from 1984 to 1993. So whether anybody liked it or not, he knew that he had a responsibility to speak on behalf of Black Canadians whenever it was really necessary. When the Dalai Lama came to Ottawa in 88, 89, somewhere in there, he came to our office first and sat there and had the audience with Howard and draped Howard with the scarf and so on. And then, of course, Nelson Mandela. I can't leave that out. When you mention the Dalai Lama, you got to mention Nelson Mandela. They go together. So Howard was a fierce critic of apartheid and had been from the get-go, from way back when he was a student at Michigan State University. So he ended up becoming a kind of de facto ambassador for the government of Canada, specifically to Nelson Mandela. But nevertheless, here's the Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney. Here's the former Prime Minister of Canada and the Minister of External Affairs, Secretary of State for External Affairs, the Right Honorable Charles Joseph Clarke, inviting Howard to go and meet with Nelson Mandela on behalf of the government of Canada, the people of Canada. And of course, he was thrilled to do that. And to play that role, and of course to witness the downfall of apartheid. After he left Parliament, after he left that version of public life, he went back into anti-racism activism in Windsor, and basically became a thorn in the side of the local constabulary of Windsor, and to such an extent that one evening in 2007, he was on his way back from Detroit, and he's 75 years old at this point. He's coming back from Detroit to Windsor, and the border police basically take him aside, question him in ways that he believed were entirely inappropriate, And then when he attempts to go for secondary inspection, he is accosted, he is thrown onto the pavement face first by some officers. He says six officers. And then he was charged with resisting arrest and some other kind of nuisance charge, booked, stuck in a jail cell early in the morning. But while all this was going on, while he was being processed, there were a group of Windsor police in the background. So obviously the Canadian Border Service in Windsor on this particular occasion were doing this assault on this extremely prestigious gentleman at the behest of the Windsor police. At least that's what I surmise from what Howard has written, what he recalls to that incident in his autobiography. And that shortly after that, a potential summons to become a commissioner for the Ontario Human Rights Commission, the very body which he'd helped to foment, went by the wayside, and he feels it was because of the fact that he was charged falsely with this particular offense. As I say, we kept in touch over the years. At one point, some folks reached out to me around 2010, 2012, and indicated that it would be really good if it were possible that we should try to see Howard nominated for the Order of Canada and the Order of Ontario. For me, that's part of the power of this biography, this autobiography, is that he shows us this. He tells us that talent is your power. Talent is your power. You believe you are powerless, but you are not powerless. Your talent is your power. Your talent is equal to power. Your talent gives you power to speak and to act in whatever capacity it is where you feel you should speak and act, where you can speak and act. And it is your talent that is your passport forward in every way, shape, and form. That's what his life tells me.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.